I have to tell you truly that everything you've just seen in that video, everything our students are able to do and create through Harvard Hillel has remained possible and has grown anew because of our dedicated supporters, and especially our co-hosts this evening. I'm very honored to introduce a person upon whose intelligence and incisiveness and generosity Harvard and Harvard Hillel have relied upon so much, Mr. Brad Bloom.
Hello, Henry. Good evening, everyone. Unfortunately, a lot of the things I wanted to say, Drew and Joan and others have already said, and I think they're going to be said again. So I'm going to try to annotate a little bit and personalize this evening. The theme for the evening is to celebrate the legacy of Jewish life at Harvard. And we're doing that through Henry's 90th birthday and through the wonderful celebration of the anniversary of Rozovsky Hall. It occurred to me as I was preparing for the evenings, what does it mean to celebrate a legacy? And my guess is people that came to here as undergraduates, graduates, faculty members, parents, or just friends would look through that legacy and find different things. So I decided to start with myself. So Terry and I arrived here in the fall of 1971. I was 18, she was 17. So you're going to get the perspective of an 18-year-old at that point in time looking at Henry Rozovsky from that point. I thought Harvard Hillel was really old at that time. I figured it would be 300 years old or something. And of course, it was 30 years old. I went over to Bryant Street. And you have to understand, I went to a boarding school where you had to go to church on Sundays. And sometimes you had to go twice, once in the morning and once at night. And to all of a sudden be at Harvard Hillel, this other world opened up to me. And Ben Gold was the wonderful rabbi, the great person who gathered us all together and created this environment of pluralism in those days. Very unusual. Henry, unfortunately for me, was at best a distant celebrity. I think the first time I encountered Henry was reading one of his books on Japanese economic history in 1973. Obviously, when he became Dean of Faculty of Arts and Sciences, which I'll address again, we were very proud that somebody from the Jewish community would ascend to such a high level. This was a time, we have to remember that back in the early part of the 20th century, that the idea that any Jewish person would ascend to a senior role in a university was unthinkable. And even as late as the 1970s, that was the case, I think. Of course, Henry was really a celebrity because he was married to this wonderful, creative, beautiful, elegant woman, Nitza. Henry, you can interrupt me and say, you know, he's right. We got that. My next connection to Henry was in my diploma. I looked this morning, I have your faux signature on my diploma, and I'm really happy to have it, so thank you for that. It can't be erased, it's there forever. And when I really met Henry was years later in the Jewish community. Henry was asked to help out CJP, the Boston Federation, with strategic planning, and we ended up working together. And I really got to know Henry and Nitza at that time, and it was a great pleasure. Later on, through Harvard Hillel, both of them I engaged with and worked with. So while I missed Henry's academic leadership in the early years, I was able to see him working hard in the community later on. I think that people these days, and probably even Henry, does not realize the impact of the role that he had in inspiring so many young people, particularly Jewish people who were at college at that time, that here was a leader who could ascend to these levels, because this was not a time where that happened. As late as I grew up in the 1950s and 60s, we were still talking about the melting pot. Henry was one of those first models for somebody to say, gee, you can actually be loyal to your heritage and to your background. You can be active in that. You can go to a place like Harvard and be 100% Harvard. And to have this be somebody who had not grown up in America, but who was himself an immigrant, was quite extraordinary. I think of us straddling two worlds sometimes, but I imagine that Henry oftentimes straddled at least three worlds. And as a little footnote, it is a little reminder for all of us that sometimes these immigrants work out pretty well, so we can keep that in mind too. Henry really showed us how to be true in so many ways. His style, his tone, his success, and the way he treated everybody along the way. And we wish certainly these days that we had more people who modeled that in our society. Henry's leadership and progression at Harvard really paralleled the ascension of Harvard Hillel during those days. We went from Bryant Street, which was in the shadow of the Divinity School of all things, to the true center of Jewish life at Harvard, Elsie's, right across the street. And we then moved down the street to Rozovsky Hall. And certainly, if it were not for the Wexners and for Moshe Safdie, we would not have that building today. So again, thank you all for that. There were other leaders that I met through the years that really got this organization to where we are today. I remember, when I first joined the board, Dick Rosenblum from Harvard Business School asked me to join the board. It was my first nonprofit board in 1980. And Dick eventually became chairman of the board. At that time, Henry Morgenthau III was the chairman of the board. And it's kind of interesting, since it was mentioned that it's the 100th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration. Henry's grandfather was a famous U.S. ambassador who warned the world of what was happening in the Ottoman Empire to the Armenians at that time. So again, to meet somebody like Henry in those days and to hear about those stories and his family and such was amazing. Other people that certainly affected me through the years, Carl Sloan, who again I met in the Jewish community and then followed him back to Harvard Hillel. And he worked with Ben Friedman so successfully in the last 10 or 15 years to really strengthen and build Harvard Hillel once again. So the question is, how do we celebrate this wonderful legacy that's been created? Harvard Hillel is a home to Jews of all backgrounds, whether you are Orthodox or you have one Jewish grandparent and you want to learn more. It is a home to undergraduate students, graduate students, faculty members, administrators, staff, and lots of neighbors. And that's really a wonderful thing too, which I think a lot of Hillels have elements of that in their history and their community. It is a place for the non-Jewish community who comes from around the world to get a glimpse of the range of Jewish life. And for many of them, that might be the first time in their lives that they've encountered that, and that's, I think, very special. And certainly, as I think Jonah mentioned, Harvard Hillel, is an advocate for Jewish values and for Jewish values and issues as they apply to other groups throughout the university. And I think Drew kind of alluded to that in her remarks also. So this is why, after thinking about where we are today and the leadership of Jonah and others, where we're going tomorrow, we have decided, the Harvard Hillel board and strong supporters, to launch the campaign, The Future of Jewish Life at Harvard. It is a campaign targeted at $25 million. We're a little bit over halfway right now. And it is focused on two things: to take care of the wonderful building that we have been in for 25 years, because it is 25 years old, and we need to prepare it for the next 25 years and beyond, and also endow the activities, programs, and the individuals who lead our programs throughout the organization. So it really is an opportunity to strengthen the organization for the future. So after you've heard from the other speakers, we've reflected on these wonderful videos, we hope that you'll join us in that campaign over the next year or two and help us really prepare Harvard Hillel for the next generations of Jewish leaders in America and at Harvard. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. When we come toward the end of our meal, we will thank and hear from our third co-hosting family, from the Wexners, and we will again have an opportunity to raise a glass to Henry Rozovsky, and we will hear from Henry himself. In the meantime, your entree, I believe, is shortly to be served, so please enjoy and please get to know one another. This is a remarkable gathering, and we will return to our program in just a little while. B'te'avon, enjoy.